Tomi Lahren, the right-wing TV host on Glenn Beck's The Blaze Network, has been suspended by Beck. So here's what happened. She basically came out as pro-choice on The View, and then there was backlash in conservative circles as a result of that. So first, let's look at her comments on the issue of abortion from a few months ago, and then you're going to see what she said this week on The View. It's a little bit different, and then we'll come back and discuss the fallout.
The pro-choicers are supposed to be about rare and safe abortions. That's how they avoid sounding like straight-up baby killers, by acknowledging abortion is not a positive thing and a difficult choice. Then we have Lena freaking Dunham out there wishing she could have murdered a fetus, wishing for the option to kill your child. Doesn't exactly say much about the cause, her character, or the pro-choice movement.
No, I'm pro-choice, and here's why. I am a constitutional, someone that loves the Constitution. I am someone that's for limited government, and so I can't sit here and be a hypocrite and say I'm for limited government, but I think that the government should decide what women do with their bodies. I can sit here and say that as a Republican, and I can say, you know what, I'm for limited government, so stay out of my guns, and you can stay out of my body as well.
So that was an awesome flip-flop on her part. She went from calling it baby killing and murder to, and that was a few months ago, to now saying, yeah, I'm pro-choice. So, but overall, on the substance, well, I agree with her now. I mean, I've actually said repeatedly, as everybody who listens to the show knows, that I view myself as a moderate on the issue of abortion. So what that means is, you should be, it should be 100% woman's choice, no question, up until basically the nervous system in the fetus is developed, and then after that, I'm fine with states regulating accordingly. So I say after the nervous system is developed, which is later on, about 23 weeks or so, then, you only allow it in cases of rape and incest, and if the life of the mother is in danger, or if there's a fatal defect in the fetus and the fetus won't make it either way. So I have a fairly moderate position on abortion, but yeah, the rhetoric of being pro-choice, I think that's correct, because the reality is when a lot of these people in the anti-abortion movement, they're upfront about it, and they say, no, the second you're done having sex, there's a third person in the room, and an embryo is the same as a, born and fully functioning baby, and a zygote and a gamete is the same fucking thing, and we're going to make no distinction whatsoever, and you're committing murder if you do, even in the earliest stages, if you have an abortion or take the morning after pill, which isn't even abortion, that's murder. So I think that's 100% incorrect, and I think the pro-choice movement is more correct, even though my position is fairly moderate. I think Roe versus Wade is exactly correct. But so yeah, I agree with her now, but it's clear that she was either pandering to the pro-life movement, or she actually believed that, and for, career reasons, now she's deciding, well, let me appear more moderate and maybe get a job somewhere else, because her contract is up with The Blaze fairly soon. But now, let's take a second here to watch Glenn Beck's response, because the very next day on his radio show, he didn't hide it at all. He opened the show with it. He started talking immediately about Tomi Lahren and his take on it, and there's a little bit of, even though he tries to mask it a little bit, you could tell there's a little bit of anger in the undertones here. Let's watch, and then we'll discuss that.
Hello, America. There are two things to discuss on this Tomi Lahren dust-up with The View, and one of them is her employment at The Blaze. The other is the constitutionality, or the constitutional argument for conservatives on pro-life. And let's start there. First of all, we have a whole bunch of different kinds of people that work here. We started The Blaze with a show called The Real News. Real News was absolutely fantastic, and it was hosted by Amy Holmes, who was openly pro-choice. So if you're pro-choice, you can have a job at The Blaze. I don't hire people who are sycophants or who have my opinion. I try to hire people who have a different opinion, because I believe in being intellectually rigorous. I don't want straw men. I want people to make a real argument on the other side. So I would disagree that you're a hypocrite if you want limited government, and yet you want the government to protect life of the unborn. It's very, very clear. But it takes intellectual honesty, and it takes a willingness to actually think these things through and to do more than just read Twitter or Facebook to get your news and your political opinions. You actually have to study these things out in your mind, especially at a time period like today. Bomb throwing bomb throwing in today's world is dangerous. Freedom of speech, it's not free. Speech isn't free. It comes with a very high price tag. First, being intellectually honest and intellectually curious. Speech is not free. It comes with another cost, and usually to the other people at the other end of your argument. The pen is mightier than the sword, and it can destroy people if your aim is clicks, views, and ratings.
Okay, there's a lot to say about that. So he's basically going after Tomi Lahren for saying, look at you, trying to get clicks, views, and ratings. Well, number one, isn't that why you hired her? And number two, isn't that what you do as well? And then I love the random pot shot of like, well, you know, if you don't get your news from Facebook and Twitter, and so like he's going after Tomi, basically saying you don't research the right way. Glenn, you do. This guy's a far-right jack-off who's been getting all of his news and information, probably from his own shitty site, The Blaze, but Daily Caller and WorldNet Daily. I mean, the kinds of theories that Glenn Beck has pushed over the years. He was fucking sued because he said the person who did the Boston bombing was somebody who it wasn't, and then he stuck to his guns after. You are in no position to lecture fucking anybody about research or standards. And then, again, Glenn fucking Beck, lecturing somebody else about how bomb throwing is dangerous. Dude, you're Glenn Beck. You got fired from motherfucking Fox News because you were bomb throwing. And you came up with these kooky, totally made up plots about how the communists and the Muslim Brotherhood have infiltrated the White House and Obama's a racist against white people and So it's just hilarious that he's like lecturing Tomi as if he's like this moral authority. Now, okay, let's get to the substance of it. Should she have been suspended? Well, first of all, let's get into why I actually think she was suspended. So does it have anything to do with the abortion comment? Yes, it has something to do with it. It's not the whole picture, but here's what I think. So yes, they're mad about her being pro-choice, regardless of what they say there, how they pretend like that's not the case. They're mad at her being pro-choice. But it was more that she mentioned that, and they viewed it as an opportunity to do something, and he viewed it as an opportunity to do something that he wanted to do for a while, which is take her down a few pegs. And he saw this as an opportunity because it is true that on right-wing Twitter, they all blew up and they were against her because this is one of the things where they think it's not debatable, and it's like she came out as pro-murder, basically, in their minds. So he saw the anger against her, and he viewed it as, okay, now I have an opportunity to knock her down a few pegs. So yes, it has something to do with the abortion comments. But the real reason is, it's twofold. One of them is, Beck is jealous. Look, Beck was on top of the world at one point when he was on Fox News. When he was coming up with his most odious conspiracy theories, he was on the cover of fucking important magazines, and he was well known. He got super famous in a short amount of time, and he kind of rode that Tea Party wave when he was doing his show, and he was the darling of the right. And he's the kind of guy who feeds off of fame and fawning adoration. And I mean, he's really one of the worst in that respect because, like, I've listened to his show before. He does, like, no prep. He portrays it like he's this intellectual. He doesn't even read news stories and talk about them. Like, here, when I do my show, I read news stories and then talk to you guys about it and give you some facts and information and then give you my opinion. He skips all the work part and just give opinion. So all he wants is love, attention. And he was on top of the world. Now he's no longer on top of the world. He started the Blaze, and he's a nobody in conservative circles because he came out big time against Trump. He kind of hitched his wagon to the Ted Cruz on the Ted Cruz side, and Ted Cruz was an epic failure, and he's even more dislikable than Donald Trump. And he's like openly anti-Trump. So he lost like half of his audience or more when that happened. I'm not kidding. And then he went through this identity crisis where now he's pretending like, oh, I'm going to be the anti-Trump conservative, but at times I'm just going to sound like liberal. And at one point he came out and this weird, almost pro-Black Lives Matter thing, which is a total no-no in conservative circles. So, and he went to like establishment liberal media outlets like the New York Times and had these pieces written about him to like revive him and to make him seem like the reasonable conservative in the Trump era. And like he has this identity crisis where he used to be the darling of the right. Now he's no longer the darling of the right. He doesn't even know who he really is. And all the while that's happening, Tomi Lahren exploded in popularity. Look, man, everybody knows, not only do I not like her, I kind of despise her. Like, I've sniped at her on Twitter a bunch of times. I think she's a ridiculous human being who's, in this position because she's articulate and she's attractive, but her ideas are odious and just factually wrong across the board. Like, I've broken down some of her final thoughts or whatever the fuck they're called. And she just says shit that's just not true and says it over and over and just says it in this way as if like, let me tell you, I'm going to break it down here. It's like, okay, pipe down. Like, you're just wrong. You say a lot of shit that's wrong. But you can't deny that her numbers are ridiculous. Like on Facebook, millions upon millions upon millions of views. I mean, how many dudes in the right-wing circles are like, Tomi Lahren, I just salivated on myself. Oh, is that saliva or some other bodily fluid? So they love her. And millions upon millions of views on Facebook. All the while, Glenn Beck's going in the opposite direction, and nobody on the right gives a fuck about him anymore. He's an afterthought. So Beck is jealous, and he wants to take her down a few pegs. And this is how he's doing it. But then there's a third reason, too. I told you it was, yes, a little bit about the abortion comment, but then most importantly, it was that he's jealous. But the third thing is, they're in huge financial trouble, the Blaze. Huge financial trouble. In fact, we've done like 2 or 3 different stories on it, and the financial troubles go back years now. And so it used to be the case that they got their money from various advertisers. Well, the advertisers jumped ship because there were this backlash, especially when the Limbaugh thing landed, when Limbaugh went after Sandra Fluke, I think her name is, yeah. And it's called her a whore for taking birth control, basically. Well, mainstream advertisers said, no more conservative radio. I don't know why that was the one thing, because they'd been spewing odious nonsense for years. Pro-torture, pro-Iraq war, which is an illegal invasion. That didn't affect the advertisers. For whatever reason, the Sandra Fluke thing blew up. And they said, no more right-wing talk radio. So they lost their traditional advertisers. Then they went to the shitty advertisers, fucking, survival kits and shit like that. And that's who Glenn Beck has mostly, advertiser-wise, been making money off of. But then they start losing those people. So then they're just propped up by right-wing think tanks. People don't know this, but there's a lot of right-wing think tanks. Whether it's Heritage Foundation or Cato Institute. I don't know if Cato is really involved with these guys because they're more libertarian than anything else. But there's a bunch of right-wing think tanks like Heritage that basically treat these guys as welfare queens. So they don't do well in the ratings. Rush Limbaugh hasn't done well in the ratings since like the 1990s, okay? Glenn Beck's TV network, The Blaze, nobody fucking watches. So they're not making it in the free market. How are they still on the air? Right-wing think tanks, which are funded by billionaires, basically, Koch brothers, people like that, big money donors, right-wing think tanks funded by them, they give money to these networks so that they can push their propaganda. But, after a while, they realize this is a shitty investment because we're not really getting anything out of it. They're just an endless money pit. Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, and people like that. So the second that they decide to cut off the flow of funds, the second the right-wing think tanks say, we're done with you, his business is going to fold up like that. And they're already massive, massive debt. They had to close down some studios they had in some places. So Tomi Lahren is their number one person at The Blaze, but he's jealous, and they find they can unload costs a little bit by saying, okay, we're going to suspend you. They say it's at least a week suspension, but her thing is up in September anyway, her contract. So here's the position he's in. Beck is fucked because Tomi Lahren is almost certainly not going to stay with The Blaze, and she's going to move on to make bank. And that may have been kind of what she was doing here with these comments on abortion, because she may have been even, basically kind of interviewing for The View. She was on The View. And the idea was like, okay, if I play the conservative, but I'm not going to be crazy, I'll be a little more reasonable, and I'll say, oh, actually, I'm pro-choice. Then all of a sudden, you go from being this extremist, super far-right, like, idiot, keep it real, to being like, oh, look, she's somewhat moderate because on one fucking issue, she's on a side that makes sense. So it could be that, or she could be, aiming for whatever. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, whatever. There's a million. She can make bank because she now has a brand, and she wants to moderate it out a little bit to get into a little bit more mainstream circles, because Beck is really the fringe of the fringe. So, that's what I think's going on there. Yes, they're mad about the abortion comments, but more importantly, Beck is jealous, and they're also in huge financial trouble. Glenn, it was too late. You can't, here's the thing. So what would I have done? Well, I would have never hired her in the first place, because I want to hire people who know what the fuck they're talking about, and she makes shit up all the time. And she said a million other things which were way more egregious than this. So I would have never hired her in the first place, but after you hire her and you set up your little right-wing propaganda outlet, would I let her go for this? No, of course not. But that's the thing. It's really not about that. It's about all those other factors, too, that play a role. So, Glenn, it's too late, though. She's already a giant star. She's already bigger than you now. So, no matter what you try to do here to, I don't know, put the cat back in the bag, that's not going to happen. You're not going to make her less famous now all of a sudden by doing this, and you're not going to prevent her from moving on to a brighter future. So, Beck in his classic pettiness, trying to take her down a few pegs. And it's going to backfire, and so in a weird way, I'm actually on Tomi Lahren's side. That felt gross to say.